Hi there, everyone. It's Father Thomas Aquinas Pickett here, Blessed Sacrament Parish in Seattle, Washington. Uh, it's been a little kind of dreary today, a little cloudy, overcast, and rainy. So I thought, hey, let's add to it and let's do a video on one of the most kind of dreary topics ever, and that is loneliness. I think right now across the world, because of the pandemic, a lot of people are experiencing loneliness. They've either been lonely already, and this situation has made it worse. Staying in place, sheltering, that can make it worse. And a lot of other people, on the other hand, maybe they've had very active, kind of engaging social lives. All of a sudden, they're stuck at home. That's gone. And what do they feel? They might feel lonely. And just scrolling through, if you just do a Google search of loneliness, COVID-19, tons of articles are already coming up. People are struggling with loneliness right now. And so what I'd like to do is offer just a couple thoughts on loneliness, philosophically, theologically, and then also focus on two challenges in particular that can come up because of loneliness. Okay? So first of all, loneliness, one of the ways we can think about loneliness is kind of like hunger, right? I've heard this said before, and I think it rings true, both from my experience, for example, is that when you're physically hungry, what is that a sign of? It's a sign you need food, you need nourishment. When you're lonely, what is that a sign of? It's a sign that you're in need of something. It's kind of like hunger. But you don't need food. What do you need? You need to love. You need to be loved. I think that loneliness, the experience of loneliness, points to kind of this underlying reality that we humans are made for and were perfected by communion, not only with others, but ultimately with God. And we see this from the get-go in the Bible, right? So God makes Adam. Adam's just kind of by himself, along with the other animals. And God says this very, very interesting thing. He says, it's not good for the man to be alone. Now, if you know St. John Paul II and the Theology of the Body at all, then you know that John Paul II makes a big deal about that. He calls this the original solitude. And for John Paul II, that original solitude, that originally loneliness of Adam, even in the paradise, even with a perfect world, that points to the reality that we humans are incomplete without being in communion with others and with God. So, and this comes from the reality that if we're made in the image and likeness of God, and if God himself is a communion of persons, Father, Son, and Spirit, then we should also be people. We should be beings of communion. John Paul II writes in his Theology of the Body, he says this. He says, man became the image and likeness of God, not only through his humanity, but also through the communion of persons which man and woman form right from the beginning. The function of the image is to reflect the one who is the model, to reproduce the prototype. Man becomes the image of God, not so much in the moment of solitude as in the moment of communion. So what do you think what's going on a lot of times when we feel loneliness? It's because we're not made to be alone. We're made to be in loving relationships, ultimately with our God and our Savior. And this flies in the face of kind of very individualistic ways of thinking about humans. Is that I just create myself out of nothing. I don't need other people. We do, and even like Aristotle, even good old pagan Greek philosopher Aristotle, he makes the point that no, humans are social animals. Just on a biological way of looking at things, we're social animals. You can't get around that. So Aristotle says, for example, in his book on the politics, about the political life of humans, he says that humans are actually more social beings than bees are, which I think that's a great line. He says, man is more of a political animal than bees. And he even goes so far as to say that, if there are people that live apart by themselves, there's probably something wrong with them. He says they're either a beast or some sort of god. That's a great line in the politics. But so our loneliness is not only natural, that we're meant to be with others, but even theologically points to the reality that we're made in the image and likeness of God. We're made to be in communion. We're made to be in relationship. And so I think loneliness offers a lot of challenges to us. Okay, it's a very difficult thing. It can be tied to depression, it can be tied to anxiety, it can be tied to a whole bunch of different things that a lot of really good people, a lot of good Christians struggle with. And a lot of times through no fault of their own, right? But I think I'd like to focus today, we'll make a short video, just focus on two challenges that loneliness can cause in our lives. First challenge is that loneliness is painful, right? It can be not only psychological, but even physically painful for people. And so what do we do when we feel pain? Naturally, we seek pleasure. And St. Thomas Aquinas even makes this point. He says that, any kind of pleasure will help to assuage, help calm down pain. And he even and he lists, for example, he has this list of things that help pain or sorrow. He says crying, being with your friends, contemplating the truth, sleeping, and taking a bath. But I think the challenge here with loneliness, the challenge is just blindly seeking out any pleasure whatsoever without a consideration for the moral ramifications that these pleasures can affect in us. It's a danger that when we're lonely, when we look for anything and anyone to help us, the danger is that we'll find something that simply numbs our pain, but doesn't actually heal. That's a big difference. To numb the pain, it's not the same thing as to heal the root injury. And so that's why a lot of people, when they're lonely, what do they turn to? Drinking, they turn to drugs, they binge watch shows, they consume food, they take naps, they do all these different things that divert their mind from the reality of their loneliness. And so I think something to maybe consider when we're lonely and when we have that pain is to simply consider the role of silence and the role of prayer as means for our growth in holiness. Cardinal Sarah, a couple of years ago, wrote a really wonderful book called The Power of Silence. I highly recommend it. He makes this point that really struck me when I read it. He says that silence is not an absence. Silence is actually the fullness of presence. When there's silence, it's not that something is missing, but actually something is there. And who is that? It's God. And so sometimes when we experience loneliness, it can be for us a spiritual occasion to rediscover the presence of God in our lives, because He is there. We know He is there. Christ says, right before He ascends, "Behold, I am with you always." We know in a Christian, whenever we have faith, hope, and charity, that comes from the indwelling of the Trinity, right there in our hearts. I made a video a couple days ago about Hugh of St. Victor, who talks about the three houses where God dwells. He dwells in creation, He dwells in the church, and He dwells in every Christian soul where there's charity. And so sometimes our loneliness can be an occasion for us to rediscover the importance and the significance of prayer. Okay? Now, prayer is not magic, right? It's not just going to solve everything. And, sometimes prayer can even lead us even to more painful situations. And you can see this, for example, some of the great mystics, St. John the Cross, for example. But I think that's the role of wisdom, is to be able to use this situation wisely, to use this situation as an occasion for us to grow deeper in our relationship with God. So the first challenge is pain. The pain of loneliness causes us to seek pleasure. But we have to be careful about that, and I would especially urge having established prayer in our life, especially during times of loneliness. The second challenge is that, if loneliness is kind of our hunger for communion, the second challenge is that there are a lot of things out there that offer false communion, that offer false love. And we see this, I think, above all today with the scourge of pornography. It's a false communion. That's not what our hearts are made for. And I think the challenge for loneliness is that, especially with the ease of access for pornographic materials, is that instantly people will go to that, because it's so easy to find that, and it'll give people a temporary sense of relief maybe. But ultimately, we know it doesn't satisfy. And so, again, one of those things that will numb the pain, but it doesn't actually heal the root issue. And so I think the response to the challenge of pornography and other like sexual sins and what we can call euphemistically, solitary sins, is the kind of the response is to look at our hearts very carefully, to realize what they're made for, to realize the beauty, the honor, and the dignity that we have as a human, and the important things that our hearts are made for. And kind of the virtue that we need to be able to direct our hearts towards those things that are actually perfective of us, that's the virtue of temperance. And especially in the sexual area, that's the virtue of chastity. Now, temperance and chastity is not just like squashing your desires, okay? It's not squashing. It's not a form of repression. It's actually kind of an elevating. It's a perfection of how we're able to actually enjoy good and perfective pleasures even more. Father Thomas Petrie is from the eastern province of the Dominicans. He wrote a wonderful book called Aquinas and the Theology of the Body, the Thomistic Foundations of John Paul II's Anthropology. Okay, here it is, Catholic University of America Press. Wonderful book. If you like theology of the body, you'll love this book. If you like Thomistic theology, you'll love this book. If you like both of them, bam! You get two for the price of one. Okay, it's a great book. It makes this point about temperance and chastity. He says this. It's page 259 and 260. It's a common mistake to view the virtue of temperance as a sort of repression of sexuality, as if Thomas seeks to govern all passion and feeling through the rubric of a cold and hard Aristotelian logic. Nothing could be further from the truth. For Aquinas, the virtues bring tranquility and joy to the soul, not a conflicted battle of repression. And then he goes on to distinguish between what's called a continent person. A continent person, they can control themselves to do kind of what's the right thing, but their emotions aren't fully on board with it. And versus the virtuous person, that they do the right thing and their feelings are on board. So he goes on to say this: the continent person experiences the vehement passions and the sensitive appetite, which he must continually struggle to moderate. The temperate person, the virtuous person, experiences delight in food and drink and in sexual activity in a way fitting to the dignity, beauty, and honor of the human person. I think that's a wonderful section. That's page 259 and 260. But to be able to pursue pleasure, to pursue things in a way that is fitting to your dignity, your beauty, and your honor as a human person. And for us Christians, we know that obviously that excludes pornography. And so when you're lonely and you struggle with this, what are some things that can help? Well, first of all, paying attention to your heart. As Christ says that all evils come from our heart, in Matthew chapter 15. To remember that your heart is made for communion. It's made for real love, real relationship. And that if you feed it any replacements, it's not going to satisfy. It's going to make it even worse. And I'll say also, I'm the promoter for the Angelic Warfare Confraternity, which is a devotion in the church, especially to St. Thomas Aquinas, for those who want to grow in chastity. I highly recommend the Angelic Warfare Confraternity if you struggle with this issue, because our sexuality is a wonderful gift from God. It's a wonderful gift from God, and when used well, it can lead to incredible flourishing, incredible joy, and incredible peace. Because what have we done? We've put on our new self, made in the image and likeness of Christ, and we've fought valiantly to put off our old self. So the second challenge of loneliness is that for a lot of people, it can be an occasion for pornography and other sexual sins. The response to this is to really examine our hearts carefully, to remember our dignity, and to use whatever means necessary we need to help grow in the virtue of temperance and of chastity. All right, that's it for the day. I hope all is going well with you. I hope you're staying healthy and holy, and I really hope that you stay awesome. Pray for me. I'll pray for you. God bless.